This is our federal resume preparation workshop led by Elaine Robles with the Environmental Protection Agency. Thank you all for coming. Elaine has a presentation that's about an hour long, and then there will be time for questions at the end. Elaine, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate your time. And if you want to just go ahead and jump into your presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rebecca, and everyone at the Auraria campus in CU Denver. It's my alma mater. I graduated there several years ago. I'm very pleased to be here and to present to you. I am no stranger to a lot of you. I've presented before on similar topics. But my name is, for those who are not familiar with me, my name is Elaine Robles. I work at the Environmental Protection Agency. I have about over 20 years of service with federal government, specifically with EPA, and primarily in the area of human resources. So I focused in benefits and retirement, processing personnel actions. When I first started, I actually came on board through a federal program for students. It's a work study program that was known as the SCEP program, the Student Career Experience Program, and is now renamed as the Pathways Internship Program, which I'll talk about a little bit in the presentation if you're not familiar with the program. It's a great one. And so now my roles at EPA have changed a bit. I am the recruitment and outreach coordinator for the region. I'm also the internship coordinator for Region 8, which is the region that I am currently working at, and it's located in Denver, Colorado. It's considered or referred to as the Mountains and Plains region. I'm also the American Indian Alaska Native Special Emphasis Program manager for our region, and the National American Indian Alaska Native Vice President for our national organization through the EPA. And so what I enjoy doing is I reach out to colleges and universities. I recruit for talent. I talk about how great EPA is as a place to work, as well as programs that are available to current and recent college graduates. And so really happy to be here today. I'm very excited to promote programs that will help you get your foot in the door, and hopefully through this presentation and any questions that I can answer for you, we'll be able to get you prepared to apply for those positions by using your resume and being able to create a resume that fully enhances your experience, your skills, your knowledge, and your abilities. And so with that, I will go ahead and share my screen in the presentation. During the presentation, it'll hit certain aspects. I realize your last event was an interviewing panel, and so we won't be covering that today. However, if there are questions that are around the same topic, I'd be more than happy to answer them as well. But we're going to touch upon applying for federal positions, preparing your resume writing tips, and creating a resume using the Usajobs resume builder tool. And then we'll go into some questions afterwards. So I'm going to go ahead and share, and let's begin. So we're going to talk about pathways to federal career resume writing portion of it. There are several ways, pathways into federal government, and I happen to be on the last couple of panels, listening to all the great information and insight that was provided by government professionals and those that are in more of the community type of positions or community work type of positions. And so there is a big need. It's a great way to be able to use your background, your experience, your knowledge, and your skills in order to impact or make an impact in communities that government agencies serve. And so these are ways in which you are able to, or that will help you on your federal career path to be able to get your foot in the door. My contact information was in the last screen, but one thing that I would recommend that you do is exploring your hiring paths, or the hiring paths that are available to you. So you are able to learn about various paths to federal employment, and I underlined it here, the eligibility requirements, because it's important for you to ensure that you have everything together when you apply for a federal position on the Usajobs website. And so on USA Jobs, there is an area called Exploring Hiring Paths, and you'll notice that there's several buttons underneath. So if you are a current or former federal employee, and you click on the button that is for federal employees, it'll give you information that is required in order for you to be able to apply for positions under a federal employee. So in this case, you will need an SF-50, which is a notification of personnel action. It is proof that you either have held federal status or you are a current federal employee. Below that, just down a couple, and there are several, and we won't necessarily go over all of them, but ones that are pertinent may include students and recent college graduates, where the requirement to apply for these type of positions are a copy of your college transcripts. And of course, it's to show that you have completed your coursework. It'll show your graduation date and so forth. And so you'll want to update that as proof that you are a current or former student. If you are an individual with a disability, you'll want to have the disability letter that is either written by a medical professional, or there is a federal form that you can fill out as proof that you are in fact an applicant with a disability. And this is important because same as if there's a certain hiring authority that is available to use, which is a more non-competitive hiring authority, where you are able to be considered outside of the general hiring process, and you're given to your information is provided to a hiring manager, assuming that you're qualified for the position, and they are able to make a decision to hire you directly. You're also, if you are a Peace Corps, a returning Peace Corps volunteer, or AmeriCorps under the VISTA portion of that, you do have a non-competitive eligibility for up to a year, and there is some flexibility to where that could be extended out to 3 years, but you do need documentation as proof of that. And veterans who apply for these opportunities will require a copy of the DD-214 or an SF-15 as proof of veterans preference. So once you've gotten your documents together, and this is just an easier list of documents that are required, they are actually shown on the prior slide, but as you'll see that in addition to submitting your resume, in addition to answering the questions that are required for every announcement that's posted on USA Jobs, you're also required to provide documents and to upload those. If these are missing with your application, they will not remind you to attach them. You will not be considered for the position. And we have had instances where there's individuals who have had great resumes, have a lot of experience, but they did not upload required documentation and they could not be considered. They were not following the directions of the announcement on USA Jobs. So make sure that regardless of how you're applying or what opportunity you're applying for, make sure that you're familiar with the required documents and have them prepared for uploading and attaching to your application prior to submitting your application for the opportunity. Now, I included this slide because it will give you an idea of salary and pay range. A lot of times I get the question, I'm not sure what types of positions I should be shooting for, or what types of positions I should be applying for given my current status. So this gives you a basic idea. The salary range is 2021 amounts for a GS5 through a GS9, step 10. So with federal government jobs, they start out at grades that are considered like technicians and assistants. Those are considered one interval jobs. So you'll see them as being GS 3, 4, up to a 5, but they're one interval. Positions that are considered more like professional or specialist type of positions, those are considered 2 interval positions. So you'll regularly see advertised positions that are outside of a technician or assistant as being advertised at a GS 5, 7, 9, and 11 for entry level, and then GS 12 and 13 for more mid-career type positions. So these are 2 interval positions. Now within each grade, there are 10 steps So you can be a GS5 step 1, and then there's 10 steps after that, which are increases in salary. So this pay range incorporates GS5 step 1 through a GS9 step 10. So it starts out at 38,665 to about 76,168, that pay range. Now, based on education level, if you have your bachelor's degree, you automatically qualify for a GS5. If you have a 3.5 GPA or higher, or have some experience under your belt, then you may qualify for a GS7 based on the bachelor's degree and maybe some experience. Now, if you have obtained your master's degree, then you would automatically qualify based on your degree solely for a GS7. But if you have, again, higher grades or GPA level and maybe some experience, you would be able to qualify, you could qualify for a GS9. So it's safe to assume bachelor's degree, GS5 to GS7, master's degree, GS7 to GS9. Now, if you see opportunities that list they're hiring for a GS12 or 13, then you know that these are considered mid-career. And the one level, and I'll jump back a bit, because the one level I did not include is GS11. Normally, if you were to have like a PhD, automatically you'd qualify for a GS9 or a GS11, depending on the experience. So I'll insert that there. But going back to mid-career, GS12, GS13s, those are considered mid-career positions, which means that in addition to any absolute education requirement, and by absolute education requirement, it means if you were to apply as an environmental scientist, for instance, there is a requirement that you have at least 24 semester hours of physical science coursework. For an engineer, you would need to have a degree in an engineering field. Those positions have an absolute education requirement. For other positions, they may accept any or most degree focuses. But these certain positions will require absolute education. Accountants are the same way. But what that means is, going back to absolute education requirement in mid-career, in addition to that requirement, you must have at least 1 year specialized experience at the next lower grade of the position that you're applying for. An example is if I see a position that is at a GS12 that I'm interested in applying for, I know that in addition to any absolute education requirement that's listed, I will need to have 1 year specialized experience to that position at the GS11 level in order to qualify to apply for this position. And so if you're newly starting out and you're getting ready to graduate and you don't have prior federal service, then it will not help you any to apply for a position at the GS12 or 13, even though you may have a lot of intern experience or you worked as a lab technician on campus or what have you. Because there needs to be specialized experience for 1 year in addition to absolute education requirements.
Elaine,
I'm
just a second? Yeah,
sure.
The same thing, just asking if you can click the hide button. There's a little, yes, perfect.
Is it taken? Oh, okay, great. I didn't know if it was my end or everybody could see it. I apologize.
Oh, no problem. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. This might be a good time to see if there was any questions.
Yes, thank you. This is Mark Eisenberg, and I'm helping monitor those for you. And we did have a question about your last page. So someone asked about those ranges. If they're lucky enough to get an offer, is there the same room for some salary negotiation as there are in other jobs, or is it more in the private sector, or is it more fixed and rigid once you're in that range?
There could be some flexibility. It depends on the situation. So with federal positions, depending on what positions are being advertised, for instance, there might be relocation expense that was determined early on when the hiring manager was looking to recruit. Maybe they're looking for, diversifying our workforce, and since we're in mountains and plains, reaching out to applicants who are maybe out east or far west. And putting out there that we'd be able to pay relocation expenses. That's not always the case. Actually, it generally doesn't happen. But for hard to fill positions, we may offer loan repayment as an incentive. Also, if you have extensive experience or maybe a prior internship with the federal government or a prior position with the federal government, and you're applying for a position, you may be in a position where you can request a higher grade, a step within that grade in order for it to bring what you were making before closer to what we would be willing to offer you. So depending on the position you're applying for, the agency that is hiring, you may have some ability and flexibility to negotiate salary. It just depends on the manager and the agency.
Thank you. And then what I hope is a quick question. You mentioned a minute ago, if somebody had graduated, they could be considered a recent graduate. This person graduated in 2018. Had you said it has to be within a year, or what are the qualifications there?
Great question. And we actually will cover it a little bit more later on in the presentation, but I will let you know that recent college graduate has been defined as 2 years following graduation. So if you graduate, I think the example was, or the individual graduated in 2018, then you would have had 2018 through to 2020 to apply for recent college graduate focused positions. That's considered recent college grad. Now, if the student were to re-enroll, let's say they had attained the bachelor's in 2018 and re-enrolled to work towards their master's. Once they graduate with their master's degree, they have another 2 years in which they can apply competitively for recent college graduate focused positions. Now, if it's a recent college graduate, a returning Peace Corps volunteer who went to school and has exceeded their 1 year non-competitive eligibility benefit, then we can take into consideration that they went back to school and extend that 1 year non-competitive eligibility to 3 years. So they may qualify both as a recent college graduate and returning Peace Corps volunteer with non-competitive eligibility. I know that's a long answer. It really depends on a student's particular situation. But generally speaking, 2 years following graduation, within those 2 years, you can apply as a recent college grad.
Thank you, Elaine.
Sure. So we'll go ahead and push forward, and I'll stop, in between as well to check on questions. So please feel free to type in your questions in the chat. So now let's talk about actually putting together your resume. So you have looked for possible opportunities on Usajobs. Let's say that you identified one, and now you're interested in applying for it. So you're looking at your resume. My recommendation, it is recommended that you do your homework. Doing research on the agency that you're interested in applying for a position with gives you clues on that agency. It'll let you know what their vision is, what their mission is, any new projects that the agency as a whole is participating in, or in a particular area. So in our case, it's Region 8. Region 8, we have 6 states that we work with: Colorado, Utah, North and South Dakota, Wyoming, and Montana. And so within that, there may be some really interesting projects that we're focusing on. Our particular region, we have about 80% of the work done in tribal communities. And so we have a big spotlight on Region 8 because of that. So there are many times project focuses that focus on tribal communities. And so being updated with those projects will really help you out. Also taking a look at an agency's goals, their values, and their work culture is important because, number one, it will help you to identify whether this is an agency that you feel strongly about, that you're interested in working for. Maybe asking yourself, what do I want to do as a career, and who am I going to be impacting? What types of communities, what type of work will I be doing? And so this helps you by learning more about the agency. It also helps you to customize your resume, helps you to customize any credentials that you may hold. Also helps you to customize career goals. Maybe you were interested in environmental work. You just weren't certain where you wanted to place your focus. Did you want to work in hydrology? Do you want to work in Superfund, working on cleanup, working as an on-scene coordinator, as law enforcement? So reading into and doing homework on an agency will give you a lot of insight, as well as help you in maybe modifying or enhancing your career goals to include work with, and I'm always going to use my agency as an example, but working with EPA and the environment. It also helps you to customize your language and wording. If you're going to school and your coursework includes learning about NEPA and other environmental regulations like RCRA, government agencies use a lot of acronyms. Familiarize yourself with the laws, the policies, the regulations, how they're implemented, how they move through from policy into being applied through community work and stakeholders. So make sure that your language, that's reflected in your resume, because if they're asking if you have direct experience or knowledge about the NEPA program or the air program and air permitting, then you'll know how to word your resume so that it's obvious and evident to the HR specialist reviewing your resume that you know what you're talking about. And what you may have heard in the interview panel, this will later on help you by doing your homework in a potential or in an interview that you may get if you're selected for a position or selected for an interview for a position. You can use this research to come up with questions for the interviewer that will communicate your interest in the agency that you're looking to work for. So it benefits you in a number of ways. Some resume writing tips. Please note that federal resumes are considered longer than average. So with private sector, you're usually looking at about 1 page, maybe front and back. With federal resumes, it enables you to expand your knowledge, skills, and abilities, and be able to expand that from, generally speaking, 2 to 5 pages. Just remember that the quality of the information is more important than the quantity. You don't want to fill up 5 pages just because it's allowed. You want to make sure that the information that you're putting on the resume is quantifiable and that it's high quality. So it can be up to 5 pages, but maybe you have 2 pages and 2 or 3 pages, and you are looking to include a writing copy or some sort of writing sample if the position requires it. It also includes more detail than standard resumes, hence allowing you to expand the number of pages in your resume. And it also includes all required information. And by required information, we'll see on the next slide what that looks like. So required information may include, if you look at the example, and I know it's a small one, but it has a lot of information that not everybody includes, nor necessarily should they include. But you'll notice that it has the DSN number, which in this case, we don't use DSN, but it may be the vacancy announcement number, the announcement that you're applying for, all of your contact information, your address, your email address. This one includes whether you're a U.S. citizen and veterans preference, but that's not necessarily required because when you apply for a position, you indicate that on the electronic application prior to submitting your resume. So you don't have to add that to a resume necessarily. And it's the same with clearance. That is extra information and not always required, and it will depend on the position that you're applying for. You shouldn't modify the border. Don't try and get everything in. That's the reason why we allow for more than just 1 page of your resume. You can expand on your experience and your skills. You don't have to modify the borders or minimize your font. Keep your font at 10 to 12 point. Do not include your social security number or any other type of personal identifiable information that could be dangerous. And there's no need to include additional personal information like height, weight, marital status, and photo. I know it sounds weird, but I've received resumes. I've been to career fairs where students will hand me resumes that have their picture, that have their height and weight. And so this is not required, and I would recommend that you do not include that. So resume format. There are a few ways to take a look at how to put your resume together. The first is a chronological way. This lists work experience according to date, with the current job appearing first. So that's pretty standard. This shows that when your career is progressive and that you plan to continue in the same line of work. This is chronological, just a straight chronological resume is for someone who maybe has had a career and has gone back to school for a change in career focus. And so they may want to take the correct, quantify their experience by listing chronologically their titles and their experience from, from prior positions. That doesn't always work for college students that have, or recent graduates that don't have a whole lot of experience. So chronological may not be the ideal way of formatting your resume solely. The next is functional, and this is what we see with recent college graduates that don't have a whole lot of experience, is that you organize the resume based on your skills in order to sell your abilities. So skills that you've used on the job in general. Maybe you're contemplating a new career, or you don't have a lengthy work history, or you held a number of different positions. Let's say there's a number of internships, paid and unpaid, that you had taken throughout the last 4 or 5 years. That's not necessarily career focused, but it provides you so many skills that you want to highlight that a functional will focus on those skills and not necessarily titles and like a progressive career type of format. And then what I feel is a really good way of formatting a resume is using a combination of both, highlighting your skills as well as applying your jobs in chronological order, or your internships, paid and unpaid. This combination format both describes the work experience as well as highlight your skills. And it usually provides the most comprehensive overview of who you are and what you're applying for, and how you can apply your past experiences and interests and skills to enable you to do the job. So some of the required information on a resume, federal resume, is the information on the vacancy announcement. As we mentioned in a couple prior screens, is that you'll want to include vacancy announcement, or just make sure if you're using the resume builder that you're applying for the right position using the proper resume. And I'll show you what I mean a little bit later by that. But just make sure that the information that or the vacancy that you're applying for is on or noted somewhere on your resume, usually at top. Your contact information. This will include phone number, email, and physical address. You'll want to include that. One side note on email, make sure you have a professional email. Make sure that the email that you use isn't something that is unprofessional, like, I don't know, party animal, a Gmail, or I know nobody has that, of course, but you get my point. Having a professional Gmail account or a professional email account is going to be best when you apply for positions. And then you'll want to include work experience. And you'll hear me say quantified over and over again, quantified. I'm going to sear it in your memory because it's so important. And it's important because when you don't quantify your work and you use general terms, you will lose out on applicable experience. And that may mean that you're not referred to the hiring manager. So you'll want to ensure that all of the experience that you list, paid or unpaid, is going to include and be quantified. It's going to include the beginning and ending dates, the number of hours that you've worked. Just make sure that it's quantifiable. You'll also want to make sure that you list your education. This will help determine, as we spoke about earlier, pay grade and what's being offered, and to enable the hiring specialist to determine your qualifications on whether you qualify at a certain level. So make sure that and also absolute education requirement. It's a quick way of looking to see if you have the educational requirements that are needed for that particular position. So include your education as well as any other qualifications. By other qualifications, that will include veterans preference. It will include Schedule A hiring preference or non-competitive hiring preference, returning Peace Corps volunteer or AmeriCorps volunteer. Did I mention veterans? I think I did. A spouse of a veteran. There are certain hiring authorities that cover spouses of veterans and widows of veterans. And so make sure that those are indicated. And again, they may not need to be on your resume because you have the opportunity to identify those qualifications on the Usajobs application port. And I'll just pause really quick, check in to see if we have any questions.
Elaine, there are things you might still be getting to, but I'll just mention them. And if so, you can just say, we'll get to that later. So one has to do with public service work in other countries, how that's considered or added, and volunteerism that's 10 years old.
So let me just clarify a question on volunteer service that has been completed 10 years ago.
Yes.
Okay. And I can touch upon them very quickly with the student volunteer service. Volunteer service or any skills that are gained by that service, as long as it's applicable, would be valuable to include. And so if you can apply what you've gained 10 years ago from the experience of your non-paid student volunteer opportunity, then definitely you can use it. Now, I would say within 10 years, you probably have some stronger some experience that it may be much stronger that you can use in order to show leadership and to show, that you have the experience and the knowledge. But I will not, ever say not to include volunteer service if it's prepared you with skills that you can use that's applicable to the position you're applying for. Now, public service work, outside of country, I think it's just identifying whether or not that experience is federal. If it's federal, it means that it may impact how you apply for a position. You may be able to apply for an internal position. And there are certain government agencies that have offices that are international and not just within the United States, or law enforcement, let's say. However, if it is not a federal agency, you can always use that experience and be able to record that experience onto your resume so that it shows the skills that you've obtained from that period of service or a prior position that was international that you can apply to the position you are looking to apply for, or that it's appropriate to the position that you're applying for. So any experience that you have that can add to showing that you are able to perform in the position that you're applying for, I would always encourage you to utilize that. But if it is a federal position, it could mean that you have another way of applying for a similar or the same position that you're interested in.
Thank you, Elaine. One more cropped up while you were answering. We have someone asking about how much detail to include with education. In other words, just the degree and the when it was conferred, or would you want to know GPA, classes taken, et cetera?
No, thank you for that. So I don't necessarily need to know specifics. I guess it would just depend on the length of the resume, as you put it together. So for instance, it may be great if you were on the dean's list. It may be great to identify any leadership organizations that you were a part of or student government positions that you were a part of, depending on, when you're including it. And also if it enhances your overall resume and your overall summary of your skills, knowledge, skills, and abilities. And so you wouldn't have to put all the information like your GPA unless, for instance, as we had talked about before, if you're applying for a GS5 and you want to be considered for a 7, then yeah, we would take a look at your GPA to see if you were at a 3.5 or higher. And that could possibly be one of those negotiations, or you'd be able to apply for a GS7 versus a GS5. But that would really be for your most recent degree, the most recent entry in your education portion of the resume. So yeah, it's just what would be helpful. Again, there are individuals who are in student government positions who have made some change within their campus that you want to highlight that as a leadership opportunity or leadership ability. And I would encourage you to include that as well.
Thank you.
Sure.
That's it for now.
Well, wonderful. Thanks. It was good to be able to answer those questions. And sometimes waiting to the end of the presentation, sometimes you just forget those questions. So this is a great way of just, being able to answer questions as we go. So let's continue on with the resume. When you're looking at resume, it's always good to be organized. So organizing, having a master record where, you're organizing your experience in reverse chronological order, starting with your most recent experience and then work back. It will provide greater detail for experience relevant to the job you're applying for. So I think we touched upon this in some of the questions, is that the opportunities that you have been able to experience, whether paid or unpaid, you'll want to make sure to provide greater detail for that experience as it's relevant to the job that you're applying for. Make sure that you enhance, or I'm sorry, that you highlight, those job skills that you were able to obtain for those opportunities and applied and connected to the position that you're applying for. You'll want to use either bullet or paragraph format to describe your experience. You could also use kind of a combination of both. So if you were going to highlight in the format, in the functional format, want to highlight your skills, then you may use bullets on what your skills look like in general, and then more of a paragraph form in order to explain or to, identify more of a chronological format resume in your prior positions, paid or unpaid. Make sure that you take personal inventory. Note your professional work experience. Make sure that you list all your position titles and organizations that you work for. List your accomplishments under each. List your duties and accomplishments that highlight your performance metrics to show impact. And that's important because, again, you want to show that you've taken leadership opportunities. Maybe you were responsible for training in new employees that have come on board. Maybe you had changed a way of process by streamlining that process and thus saving resources as far as whether it be monetary or employee time resources. But highlight those type of things that set you apart to show that you've made impact in the positions that you've been in. Now, non-professional experience in this case could refer to volunteer and intern experience, but it's also skills that you've learned that you can apply to your objective. So these are skills that maybe you have learned by being in charge of the newsletter at a job or a school or somewhere in class or school or whatever, what have you. Note those type of skills that you've learned that you can apply to what you're applying for, what your overall objective is. And then this is where you'll want to leverage your volunteer and intern experience. Take a look at those internships that you've taken. I know at the time it's difficult to sign up and agree to work for a non-paid student volunteer opportunity, but think of the benefits that you get from that non-paid experience, meeting people, networking, finding out opportunities that are coming up that you can apply for, and just your hands-on experience. And so identify key things that you can take away from those type of opportunities and just make a mental note or jot it down because it'll make it easier in pulling that resume together. So you're not just trying to come up with wording on the fly, that you have more of an organized way of, writing down or typing in that experience that is relevant to that position or your objective. Some questions to ask yourself. What are your current responsibilities, or what were your responsibilities in the position that you had? How many employees did you supervise, if any? Can you quantify your experience? So can you say that I've worked, and I think the more obvious is, I've worked from X to Y for 40 hours a week. But also, can you quantify within that descriptive paragraph that, I was able to train on average 10 new employees a quarter. or I was able to impact and save the company, a certain amount of money because I streamlined the process, or I was able to save time and effort, of at least 10 hours a week because I helped to change the way we were doing things. That type of wording really shows that you're making impact in any position that you take. So any way that you can fit in quantifying that experience is going to be valuable to you. Ask yourself, what personal skills have you accomplished? What did you initiate and or implement? Again, connected to quantifying your experience. What leadership skills have you developed? Leadership skills involve, taking initiative, leading work groups, being able to hold a presentation or a webinar to a student chapter of a professional organization, or participating in a presentation at a national conference, those type of things. Have you received any recent awards? What are your writing skills? Do you have experience with public speaking? Those things are helpful because it shows, leadership and taking charge or taking initiative. In the area of education, training, language, and skills, I know we had a question on education. You'll want to list the degrees, schools, dates of attendance. Also, again, if you're applying for a position that could go one way or another, a GS5 or GS7, you may want to include the GPA for your most recent degree that you have obtained, along with the dates of attendance, and any awards, scholarships, fellowships, and internships that you've participated in. Any applicable training courses that are relevant to the position or the type of work that you're looking to get into. Technology skills, language proficiency. I remember from one of the panels that it's really important. Some government agencies seek out applicants that can speak another language and speak it fluently. And so you'll want to identify not only that you speak another language, but also emphasize skill proficiency. With EPA, we work in the communities. Environmental justice program goes out into the communities, and a lot of the communities that are being served that are also in some ways could be Superfund sites. They are communities where English is a second language. And so being able to speak an alternative language is going to be helpful in order to communicate necessary information. And that's just one example. You want to also include professional associations, professional association memberships, identify all activities, organizations, and participation. Also, you want to identify attendance at professional conferences. This opens you up to receiving additional information, being part of research opportunities and presentation opportunities. A lot of times that you can apply to present findings on research and be on an email group list where you'll get information on opportunities that may come along from federal agencies and other companies and organizations. And so it's always a great idea to list any professional associations and to also get involved with professional associations because it widens your network. Now, publications and presentations, you'll want to include the names and titles of books and articles written, and not just include them, but to enhance the resume for the position that you're applying for. Now, a real direct example could be Office of Public Affairs. If they're looking to hire a journalist or environmental education specialist, then they may require a writing sample. And so you'll want to provide information in the names and titles of books and articles that you may have been a part of. Experience writing articles for associations or newsletters can be included. Any courses that you taught, trainings that you've held, presentations at conferences and training seminars. And it is required, or I would say required, but recommended that you keep a master file because, these things accumulate and it's hard to just remember, look back in memory to, retrieve all of that when you're first putting a resume together. It's not as difficult if you already have a good resume or a resume that you're enhancing, or updating. But if you're just creating a resume, then make sure that you've been keeping a master file somewhere. So I've been talking a lot, and I thought I would insert this I thought it was amusing, but this is also a good break while everyone's checking this out to see if there's any questions. Mark, is there any questions for me?
There is, Elaine. One of our earlier questioners had a clarification. So this person said when they asked about experience in other countries, they wanted to clarify that they worked outside of the US and then came to the US as a foreigner. So they've worked either in or for other countries, not a US agency abroad. So
right. Okay, well, that was a good clarification. I appreciate that. And that's why I included, there are federal government agencies, US government agencies that are, they have branches or locations international. So that was a good clarification. I would still say the knowledge, skills, and abilities that were obtained from those positions that were international are still going to be helpful. I would not lose that using, that in order to enhance your resume and to ensure that it's communicated that the skills that were obtained from those positions or that position could go towards qualifying for positions that are coming up. And if there were anything that was required specifically, you'll note it in the Usajobs announcement. It will tell you, who may apply, what is required, and when to submit it. So it'll be very clear as to what's needed, but definitely the experience should never be lost. It should be reflected in your resume. You don't have to start a brand new one coming from another country to the US when you can utilize that experience abroad as well. Any other questions, Mark?
One, but I don't know if you're there yet. We had someone asking about cover letters, if they're typical for government jobs, and if you had any tips for those.
Sure, and I'll answer it really quick because I actually do not really touch upon it so much in this presentation. And the reason is that, it seems that students and recent college graduates, my experience has been that I receive resumes in email format. And so there may or may not be a cover letter. I think it's always a great idea if you're submitting it directly. Like for an internship, I would always recommend a cover letter. And a cover letter should be a summary. It should be a summary of introduction. So the cover letter should include a brief introduction of yourself. It should identify what in general speaking, what your objective is, what you're looking to apply for, and your interests. So it should be brief. And now I mentioned that resumes are long, 2 to 5, maybe longer. But cover letters should still just stick with one page, front side only. And I would recommend not a full page either. I would recommend a paragraph, just with, like I said, a short introduction. And also, looking at closing it up with saying, I look forward to, working with this agency on X, Y, and Z, or I look forward to speaking to you more about my qualifications. Some sort of ending that implies that, you're anticipating that you're getting a call back at some point. So hopefully that answers. Again, I don't believe that it's a requirement, like when you use the resume builder. It's not going to walk you through putting together a cover letter. And it's not something that is necessarily looked at for applications that are submitted electronically, but definitely if you're applying for an internship, that is something that we would require. Okay, so we'll go ahead and push on. Hopefully you found this little comic amusing. I did, just to break up the presentation. But going back to, you may have heard me say and refer to knowledge, skills, and abilities. Short is KSAs. And federal employees that have worked with the agency to apply for federal positions, they know very well the acronym KSA. It stands for knowledge, skills, and abilities. So with knowledge, skills, and abilities, you'll want to review the vacancy for keywords. Identify if there's a a regulation or policy that is going to be a requirement for the position that you're going to be working on, you may want to have at least some knowledge of what that regulation and policy is. So if it specifically says working in the NEPA program with NEPA regulations, then you'll want to see if that's something that you can connect to your experience and knowledge is. You may not have a whole lot of hands-on experience with that regulation, but at least be familiarized and try to connect. So review the vacancy for keywords that you can use to highlight in your resume and stand out. Link to your job objective. So any of the resume, what you put in your resume, make sure that it falls in line with what your objective is. When you look at the vacancy, try and make connections with your job objective and what the job entails, or the job, how that would be a good fit. Start thinking like an employer. What if you were hiring, what would you be looking for? And what would you be thinking that would be a great asset to apply to the position, knowing, because every announcement will list what the duties are, at least the main duties. You can start seeing how you can connect your experience or your knowledge with that. And also, it may list duties of what you'll be doing, but if it's going to be a position that's hired at the GS 5 or 7 level, even the 9 level, these are considered entry-level positions. So don't think that you have to be an expert. An expert would be a GS 13. By the time that you hit a GS 13, you should be the expert in your particular field. But at a GS 5, a 7, a 9, and sometimes even an 11, you're still in developmental mode. So keep that in mind. You're not expected to know everything at a GS 5, 7, 9, but if you're applying for a GS or 12 or 13, then you better know a whole lot. So that's also something to take into consideration when you're applying, is that, your experience should reflect, what the duties are requiring at that particular pay grade. So identify desirable skills as they apply to the position and any critical job elements. So you'll hear critical job elements. As a federal employee, this is something that, we have critical job elements. And if we do not perform adequately with those particular critical job elements, then we may no longer have a position, or we may be put on a performance plan. These are critical in order for you to successfully do your job. And they are listed in what's considered called a position description. Now you may have several job elements, like let's say you have 7, and 3 or 4 of those are considered critical. The others may be good team player, works effectively in work groups and that type of thing, or duties as assigned. But your critical job elements, you'll want to make sure that you identify, because these are going to be the most important for your success in that position. And they are listed in the duties of a vacancy announcement. Also ask yourself, what skills are needed for the position? And then focus on the mission of the agency and translate your experiences. So I'm not sure if we have veterans out there, but I know that there is a challenge with our veterans in that, when serving, they have all of this technical experience, and converting that into civilian experience can be difficult. And so making sure that you can translate your experiences in the private sector or in a student volunteer non-paid internship, translating that into what the vacancy is requesting of you is going to take some work, but it's going to be great doing it, because you're going to really evaluate what you were doing before, any skills that you've obtained, leadership abilities, and you can translate that to meet the mission of the agency and what they are asking the position that they are hiring for. So just some quick tips to keep in mind. Don't use first person statements. It becomes too wordy. It's okay to have incomplete sentences, such as wrote training manual, administered budget, streamlined, X, Y, and Z. Use action verbs, such as, and notice that these are positive action verbs, as achieved, increased, organized, streamlined. Avoid copy pasting exact wording found in the announcement. However, there's a caveat. If a term is used multiple times, you'll want to include it. I think that's just, you have specialists that are reviewing resumes, and they're going to look for, your eyes automatically draw to connecting words when you're looking at what is required in a position, what they're hiring for, and the skills that you have. So even though I would not copy word for word found in the announcement, if you see a term that is used multiple times, definitely try and insert that in your resume, so that that's a quick connector between the vacancy and your resume. Use plain language. Make sure that you use acronyms minimally. Now, I mentioned knowledge of NEPA, and it's okay to use acronyms. Just make sure the first time that you use an acronym in your resume that you spell it out with the acronym in parentheses. Later on, you can use the acronym by itself, but just make sure that you set the foundation of, a person, not assuming that the person reading your resume knows what the acronym means that you're referring to. And then throughout the body, if you want to use that, that's fine. But just make sure overall that you're using plain language. And then quantify, quantify, quantify. You knew I was going to insert that. It's important to quantify not only the time spent in a position, but also action words in showing, how you've changed and how you've impacted the position that you were in and impacted the organization or agency or company. Include recent and relevant positions. Leave out, odd short jobs that are irrelevant to the position you're applying for. Repetitive work. So let's say you were mowing lawns every summer, well, you know what, that if it was your business and you had customers, then that shows great leadership. That shows great managerial, especially if you had people working for you. And I would say highlight that, but you don't have to list every summer that particular position. You can condense it into, maybe one period of time where you highlight and you just list all of what you've gotten from that job experience. Remember, small gaps in employment are okay. Leave out any temporary, irrelevant, short-term employment that's not going to help or enhance your experience. Show the context of your accomplishment, and any major career changes should show relevance. So if you were, in IT and you were working for private sector, and then you went to school, you wanted to, get some more training, and you want a degree in environmental science, and you wanted to use your, experience in IT along with environmental science work, then you can show that that's relevant because you're using, a combination of those skills in order to successfully perform in a position that you're interested in as a career change. So anytime that you can show major career changes and relevance, I would, it's important to kind of show that. I've had employees or individuals who haven't been in the workforce for a while because, they took off to have children. And so there's a break there, and it was accounted for. And so that, there was a refocus on career changes and getting back into the workforce. As the panel mentioned before this one, it's okay to be human, and it's okay to reflect that, because, there are things, especially during this time, where there are things that we have had to do because of the pandemic and remote work and so forth, that it's okay to be human also, and to reflect that in your resume. So a review on what we've covered so far. Resume, 1 page or 2, 1 to 2 pages for private sector, 2 to 5 pages for federal government. Remember, quality over quantity. Don't shrink font size, use good quality paper. And I put when appropriate, because again, a lot of the applications that come in are electronic, but if you do have the opportunity to print out a resume, make sure that you're using good quality paper, that you proofread for spelling and grammatical errors. And even if you're 100% sure there's no errors, have someone else look at it. It's always a good idea to have another set of eyes to provide you with feedback. Make sure it's not auntie or grandma or mom, because they're always going to be biased and say you're doing an excellent job. You want someone and you probably are, but you definitely want someone else to give you that feedback that is a bit more non-biased and can provide you some information and feedback and recommendations. So this last leg is putting your resume to work. And Mark, I'll just check in with you one last time before we finish up to see if there was any questions that came in.
Thank you, Elaine. We do have a couple. So one, I think is relevant to what you just said in your recap about the length of resumes. And I'm just going to read this one to you as it's written. This is from Daniel. Are government managers really going to read a 3, 4, or 5-page resume? We've been told by panelists today that there are thousands of applicants. And I've previously been told most managers don't spend more than a minute or two looking. If that's true, why should we applicants spend extra time creating such a detailed resume?
Great question, great question. And I don't want to seem like I'm contradicting what other panelists have, but I will mention that it could be agency specific. So agency specific recommendations, they may require a writing sample. That's why when you pull up a vacancy announcement, you'll read through what the requirements are. And depending on the position in the agency, they may have you do other things. And so that could be the experience of other agencies where they don't want a 5-page resume. And we'll have to agree to an extent. That's why I emphasize quality over quantity. You'll want to really take a look at and strategically put down your experience. You don't necessarily want you may not want to include all of your experience if you do have a long history of work. But let's say, your work in customer service isn't necessarily, in line with the position that you're working towards right now, because there may be some more relevant periods of experience that also reflect customer service and leadership that you can, focus on enhancing versus going back 10 years or 12 years, 20 years in order to make sure that you include all of your work history. So again, I'll point towards quality. I won't say that, anything past 3 pages will not be looked at, because I don't believe that's true. Also, the way that we hire for positions, we rarely get positions that have over 1,000 applicants. For the Environmental Protection Agency, a lot of our positions sometimes will have a limit because it does take time to review resumes, and we want to do a good job with reviewing resumes, in that they'll have a cutoff of 75 to 100 applications. And once they meet that, they close the position. So it really means that if you see a position that you're interested in and it has that caveat, that's, a little asterisk that says, once we get 100 applications, we're closing it. What that means is, even if there's a closing date of 10 days out, it may be closed early, and you don't want to procrastinate or delay in applying for that position if it's one that you're interested in. So there are some limits, and I don't think I've ever seen, at least not in our agency, and we are a relatively smaller agency. Region 8 has about 500 employees, and nationwide we have 15,000. So we wouldn't normally get, wouldn't even be every once in a while, over 1,000 applications. And so a 2-page, even a 3-page, if you have a lot you want to show and it's relevant and it's quality type of information, a 2 to 3 page resume is not a problem. But again, it could be, agencies that are a lot larger, that, have the experience with a lot more applicants. So it just depends on what you're applying for. Is there any other questions, or did I answer that question, Mark?
There is, and it may be part of this next section, but one of our participants says they've submitted an application for an internship, haven't heard back. When is a good time to follow up? And I'll add to that, how is the best way to follow up on that application?
Great question. Now, I'm going to give you a general answer, and then I'm going to answer specific, because I've just recently posted 21 internship opportunities. They are student volunteer opportunities. They are amazingly awesome opportunities. They are very diverse in a variety of areas. And so that has been sent over, and you can also go to www.epa.gov and type in internships, and it'll give you a list of our summer internships. But for us specifically, A lot of our internships will have a closing date. And so the resumes, just out of fairness, they generally will not be looked at until the closing date. It enables everyone who has the opportunity to apply for an internship to get their information in, which is a cover letter, resume, and transcripts. It's an unofficial copy of the transcripts. That's A-OK. It's just showing that proof of your current student status. But so a lot of times supervisors will not look at resumes until the closing date, which in this case is going to be anywhere from March the 26th until April the 15th. And so you probably won't hear anything until the end of the month or as it gets closer to the closing date if it's one of our internships. And generally speaking, that could also be the case. You may not have heard back from anybody because the internship application period is still open, but there is always a contact for that internship. And so if you do have questions, I would recommend reaching out. If it's an email address, reach out by email and just say, I'm very interested in applying for your internship. Just wanted to check and see if you could provide updates. I had applied, that's a way of finding out what the status is. Or if you're interested in a position and you want to talk to the contact about the internship, then if there's a contact name or number, an email address, it's okay to reach out and ask about the opportunity, ask what you'll be doing, ask what's involved, how much time they're looking for you to spend on it. So there is ways that you can communicate with a project manager on an internship opportunity. You could always reach out to me if it's one of our internships, and I can provide you with overall status as well. Are we good on questions, Mark?
We are, thank you.
Sure. So now let's look at putting your resume to work, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up and take more questions. So let's say you have your resume put together, or you're considering using the resume builder, and we're going to go through that, another way of creating your resume. But now it's time to use it. So as a recent college graduate or a current student, I'm always encouraging students to consider Pathways program. There are 3 pathways to federal employment. It was put in place under the Obama administration. And there's the 3 pathways include an student internship pathway. This is available to current students enrolled in an accredited institution, at least half time as determined by the institution. And it may be converted to a permanent position. So there are 2 types of student internships. There's one that is more like a summer employment. So there's a definite start and end date, less than a year. And then there's no conversion with that option. It's just like a summer job that you get experience and make contacts. The other type of internship is more of a work study. So it's a work study where you would go to work, you would go to school. They generally are pretty related. So what you're going to school for is what you're working on. And then after you graduate, you get converted into a permanent position. When we first started, and during my introduction, I mentioned that I was on such a program. It was a work study where I attended courses at UCD and then went to work part-time and was converted following graduation. The second pathways under the Pathways program is the recent college graduates, and we did have some questions on this pathway. It is open to graduates who have graduated within the previous 2 years. So at the time of graduation, students have the opportunity to apply for opportunities within 2 years following your graduation, and that's any graduation. So if it's undergrad, you have 2 years after graduation to apply for these positions. If it's graduate, you have 2 years to apply for positions under the Pathways program following graduation. If it's a PhD, you have 2 years following that. It includes development and mentorship. So there is a developmental program where you put on a developmental, an IDP, individual development plan. You have formalized training, and you're provided with a mentor to help you through to be successful. And then there's a permanent appointment and conversion that happens following the 1-year trial as a Pathways intern. Lastly, there is a Pathways program, Presidential Management Fellows opportunity. This is open to individuals who have completed a qualifying advanced degree within the past 2 years. and its focus is on leadership development. So it's a national program. I want to say that since it's a national competitive program, that it is highly competitive, and I believe the opening date is this month. And so you can go to epa.gov, type in Presidential Management Fellows or Pathways, and you can get more information on how to apply, because there's a specific website that is not necessarily Usajobs to get more information, but on the EPA website that you can get more information on. So those are the 3 pathways. And as I mentioned with the internship program, the eligibility is that you are enrolled or accepted for enrollment at least half-time, and half-time is determined by the institution. It could include high school, vocational, technical certificate, undergraduate, graduate, and professional. Most of the opportunities that are advertised are going to be college level, and so we don't get many high school unless it's in maybe administrative focus. So internship program is administered at the individual agency level. So not all agencies offer the internship program, but many do. Appointments may be made to any position for which the individual is qualified. So it could be a temporary appointment not to exceed 1 year, which is the short-term internship program. And then the appointment for an initial period is expected to last greater than 1 year. So that's the longer-term work study option underneath the internship program pathway. When you go into Usajobs, just to show you where it's found, when you click on that first button where it says students and recent graduates, it will take you to this page. This is where you'll find eligibility. You'll see links to get more information and videos, as well as a link to look for jobs. And right down here, even though it's maybe hard to see, it says, how do I know a job is open? And it'll explain it and give you a link to where it takes you to a list of opportunities. So this is what one looks like. You'll see it says, like, it can say student trainee. It can say management and program analysis, where the opportunity is located, that there's multiple locations or where it's located, and the pay. So one is starting at $27,000, which is equivalent to a GS 3.4, and there's a not to exceed date. One is anywhere from 5 to an 11, which is still entry level, and it just depends on your experience. And then here on the right, you'll see the top filters. So these are what you can kind of drill down. These are current students, and you can check recent graduates. So these are internships that are available. Now with recent college graduates, these are for individuals who are graduated from a qualifying education institution. It's a 1-year excellent developmental program, and we covered that. This is what some of the opportunities look like for recent college grads. Again, it'll list, the positions in general engineering. These are permanent positions with a 1-year trial, what they start hiring at. And notice that I clicked recent graduates, so it's only going to show recent graduate opportunities. But there's a variety. And the PMF, it's the government's leadership development program for advanced degree candidates. It's been around for over 4 decades. It's just part of the Pathways program recently, and it's been revamped to develop the best cadre of federal leaders. And this is, I think this is a duplicate, so I'm going to skip that. And as I mentioned, it's for advanced degrees only, and it's a 2-year leadership development program. And it looks like it's for individuals who expect to complete requirements by August 31st of the following year. That's when you start applications before that time. And how to apply for PMF. There are some that are, it looks like it is announced through Usajobs. That is an update and it's an enhancement. But you can find out more information on www.pmf.gov to get more information on the yearly cycle and how to apply and the deadlines if you are interested in something like that. So submitting resumes on Usajobs, to apply, you must usually submit your resume, an online questionnaire, supporting documentation, transcripts or college course listings, an SF50 copy if applicable. So this determines that you've had some federal experience if that is the case. And we have a resume builder. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is, you know, sometimes it's difficult to ensure that your position or all of your resume has been quantifiable, like made quantifiable as far as starting and end dates and number of hours, especially if you've performed student volunteer or internships. You know, it's not acceptable to put on your resume, you know, I performed or I worked at, you know, such and such agency summer of 2020. That's not enough to give you full credit. You will get no credit for that because it's not quantifiable. We're not going to assume that you worked the entire summer, and we're not going to assume that within that summer you worked full time. So by adding beginning and ending dates and number of hours, if you worked 20 hours a week for 3 months, then essentially you'll get you know, half of that time, so a month and a half credit because, you know, it's part-time internship. So it needs to be quantifiable, and this is a great way to do that by adding a resume. When you get into Usajobs and create a profile, it'll enable you to upload or to create up to 5 resumes. So you can upload your current resume, but then you can also build a resume and you can tailor it to the opportunities that you're applying for. And that's the big benefit of this. So you'll click on add a new resume, and then you'll click build a resume, and it gives you the option to upload a resume. If you build it, it will prompt you to fill out information before you move forward. And I highlighted and circled the areas where, you know, your resume is quantified, the start and end date, as well as the average hours per week. So it prompts you to fill it out completely. It'll give you options to insert job-related training, language skills, additional information, so you can make it a full resume to incorporate a lot of information. And the good thing is, once you create or build a resume, it will be listed along with any uploaded resumes in the area that I circled below, as well as if you're applying for a position, it'll show you where you're at in the process. So, you know, here I'd be selecting one of these resumes and then moving forward in my application before I finished. But this will give me the option to build multiple resumes. And the reason this is a good thing is if you have a variety of skills, you say you have an IT background, but you also have a scientific background, then maybe you see something in IT that's IT heavy, really heavy on the IT experience, then you'll want to tailor a resume that reflects that. If you see a position that's in community outreach, then maybe you want to highlight other areas of your experience and skills by creating another resume. So you don't have to keep modifying the same one to, you know, in any great extent. You can just pull another resume and modify it slightly. So this is an opportunity for you to hold up to 5 resumes to be able to do that and to apply for positions and tailor it to give you the best opportunity for being selected or identified as best qualified. And that, my friends, is the end of the presentation. I hope that it was helpful, and I will open it. I thought that I would actually have a full half hour for questions, but I'm more than happy to take your questions at this time. My contact information is on the screen. I feel free to reach out by phone or email. During this remote time, you know, at least reaching out by email is always best because I see that first. But I usually do resume reviews and offer feedback, provide information. And so with that, I'll see if, Mark, is there any questions?
We do have some, and thank you. And I'll just remind everyone who's attending, if you've been waiting on a question, now's a good time to submit it through that Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. One of our attendees is asking for clarification on that Pathways program. Is it specific to the EPA or other government positions?
Okay, great question. So the Pathways program is government-wide. So it's not just through the EPA, although we utilize the Pathways recent college graduate program pretty extensively, but it's government-wide. So if there is a government agency you're looking to get involved with and to apply for positions, you can search out that particular agency or look at all opportunities under Pathways, and it'll show you what agencies are hiring for what opportunity. But it's not just with one particular agency, it's federal agency-wide.
And then if you're open to it, we have a question or two related to interviews, not resumes.
Sure, absolutely. I'd be more than happy to help.
So this was someone in our last session, don't know if they're here as well, but they asked, how do you answer that question? Tell us about yourself.
So on an interview panel, if I was an interviewee and someone is asking, to tell them about myself, the recommendations that I would have is, similar to that cover letter. It's a brief introduction. I would not be looking at, although you can always insert some interests, I would try and keep the introduction relevant to my objective. So what are my goals, my interests? I've had students who express themselves in an interview by saying that, I've always wanted to work in the area of X, Y, and Z. I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to help me in my overall goal of, and then, fill in the blank. But, you don't want to run down and do a complete summary of your resume. I would say highlight some of the areas that would enhance and connect you to the position that you're, or the objective that you're trying to connect to. And then just be, try not to be nervous. Take your time and speak. Sometimes if we're nervous, we either don't speak, we clam up, or we speak too much and we go on. I'm that way. I can continue to talk and talk and talk because I'm generally an introvert by nature. And so, but once you get me going, I will continue to go. So it's okay to pause. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to ask for clarification. It's okay to really think about it. But in the back of your mind, and this is going off the introduction part, but in your mind, have a couple questions available to ask, and also have a couple scenarios that you can point to that will show how you handle conflict, how you handle problems, how you've overcome certain things, and recently, diversity and inclusion, your knowledge of and experience of diversity and inclusion. We've been incorporating that because as an agency, our mission and goal has been to enhance the experience of our applicants and our employees in the areas of diversity and inclusion. So being able to connect that is going to be important. Hopefully that was helpful.
It was. We're done with questions, but I'd like to pick up on that last one you just mentioned. So we have more and more employers coming to us wanting to hear, because they want to recruit diverse students, and both the campuses that came together for this event have a diverse student body. When students are looking for a good fit with that agency, how can they ask the interviewer about their culture and how open they are to different voices and contributions?
Well, and that's an excellent question, Mark. An excellent follow-up, because, I myself, our agency, the Environmental Protection Agency, is a relatively small and new agency. We've been in business for 50 years. And part of that, has been 38 years of that is where we developed our Indian program for working with Indigenous communities. And so it is important to find out if the work culture is a good fit for you. And so my recommendation, and we've been in work group meetings with our interviewers, is that they are interested when individuals ask, what is the work culture like? It provides an opportunity for our managers to talk about our focus on diversity and inclusion, what we expect from employees, how we expect inclusion and from our employees, from work groups, in promotion decisions and hiring decisions, in leadership positions and opportunities. And so it actually enables an organization to really toot our own horn and on the steps that we're taking in the areas of diversity and inclusion and how that's being reflected in work culture. And so definitely just asking straight out is good. Now, I mentioned questions as it pertains to diversity and inclusion and providing an example of someone's experience with that. And sometimes it's difficult to identify if you haven't had those types of situations, work experiences that you can have in the area of, tackling a really charged conversation or a response to a micro, aggression, let's say, in the workplace. But as a student, you are automatically, if you're a current student on a campus, even though we're remote, we have a lot of diversity on campuses, our area campus in general, and I think Metro State University in particular has been identified as a minority serving institution, and therefore there's much diversity and inclusion going on. And so your experience as an on-campus student is going to also be relevant and applicable, and to enhance that and to share like what you're feeling, how you feel about certain topics is going to be important in determining whether you're a good match with a particular agency's work culture.
Thank you, Elaine. You've been great. I think Rebecca wanted to come in and wrap things up for us now.
Sure, absolutely.
I just wanted to say thank you again. We always love having you. I think your information and the way that you share it is very easy for students to understand. So I really appreciate your time. This is, you've helped us the last couple of years, so we always appreciate you coming in. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us.